Halkias.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll say again. My name is Maria Halkias. I'm an assistant professor in the Masters of Arts in Education at Stockton University. I also work with bilingual and ESL teachers, helping them get their endorsement. I'm also a reading specialist, and I worked in both public and private schools throughout New Jersey. I also have my doctorate in curriculum and instruction, and I was a former early childhood educator and director.
Hi everyone, my name is Christiana Dalton, and I'm a teacher of multilingual learners at West Windsor Plainsboro at the high school. I teach English language arts to level 1 and 2 multilingual learners, and I also co-teach Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and American History as well. And that's to levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 ML students. Some past teaching roles I've had, I used to work at Bordentown Regional School District as a K to 12 ESL teacher. I taught adult English, and I also taught English as a foreign language in Thailand. I did the master's at TCNJ to get my ESL endorsement, and yeah, my email's at the bottom.
So today we're going to start off talking a little bit about um, verbal reasoning. We're going to have a little introduction, and we get a little mini lesson from Christiana, high mini lesson. And then we're going to talk about literacy knowledge, what it is, what are the challenge embedded in embedded in our presentation. We'll talk about what are the challenges for MLs and how we can teach it effectively in working in our ML classrooms. And then we'll have a little bit of an exit ticket, and we will share our slide at the end of our presentation today. So we've had a series of presentations on the reading rope. So we also just want to make sure we do this PLC through the lens of the reading rope. So we are also thinking about how does Scarborough's rope show that reading skills. I'm sorry, I apologize. My screen is blocking some of the questions here. What is included in the language comprehension strand? Why are literacy, knowledge, and verbal reasoning essential for skilled reading? And how do these skills help readers understand and interpret text? So let's start off with a little poll as in our introduction. And we're wondering, which of the following strategies are you most likely to use before you introduce a text to your students? Is it A, a mystery bag, B, a visual art analysis, C, a wordless picture book or books, anticipation guide with a Likert scale, or E, any kind of pictures or visuals related to the text, or F, historical timeline? So just put it in the chat. Which are you most likely to use before you introduce a text to your students?
Pictures and visuals related to text. Anticipation guide, pictures, visuals. Looks like. Looks like mostly we have D and E. So anticipation guide, Likert scale, or pictures and visuals related to the text.
Well, we asked this question to just help us quickly identify what you're already doing well in your classroom. It also challenges us to consider new ways that we can engage our students in making inferences and to highlight some hands-on strategies. And I think, Christiana, when we were preparing to do this presentation, we wanted to make a very clear point that sometimes it's just a matter of hearing someone else talk about the strategies that they're currently doing and realizing that you already do them. So literacy knowledge and verbal reasoning are critical components of skilled reading, and they can be developed even before students encounter complex texts. So I'm doing my examples through the lens of early childhood. I was primarily a first grade teacher, but I did teach all the grades, but I always see myself as an early childhood educator. And what I love to do to introduce a text is to have a mystery bag. And I would present clues and prompts and to get and elicit inferences from children. I'd have different objects in there and invite them to infer what might be in the bag or how the items in the bag relate to each other. And so you can have, for example, a stethoscope, a notebook, an ID badge, and they have to think about how all of those items relate to each other and where you might find them, for example, like in a doctor's office or in the nurse's office.
Yeah. So Maria's examples are mostly going to be aimed at elementary and primary learners. My examples will be more focused on secondary, specifically high school. So whenever I introduce a text, even if it's a poem or a short story, I do some kind of anticipation guide or Likert scale just to get students engaged in the general topics. And I found that having opinion-based questions makes them more interested from the get-go in the reading. So I typically do have them complete a Likert scale kind of activity independently first, and then I have them walk to whichever side of the room that they strongly agree, strongly disagree, and explain their reasoning. And I found that that has, for secondary students, has been a good way to get them engaged in thinking about the concepts related to the text from the get-go. So, I'm going to do a quick Thai language lesson. I'm not fluent in Thai. Like I said, I taught English as a foreign language in Thailand for 2 school years. Actually, during the COVID era, it was a very interesting time to be away from home. But yeah, I have a quick couple slides about the Thai language. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is my approach to language acquisition when I was living abroad. I think that anyone who's traveled to another country or maybe lived somewhere else, one of the first things that you're going to learn is the food language, right? You have to know how to order food and what kind of food you like and if you have dietary restrictions. So, of course, that was one of the first things that I learned in Thai. The word eat or eaten or eating, since the verb tenses are a bit different, is sounds like gin, but this is the written version. Um, Already or yet is yang, and have you is ru. So I color coded them. So now that we're looking at this picture here, you can hopefully see the English text, but looking at the English words and then the color-coded version in Thai, maybe you can put in the chat or you can turn off your mic and share. What do you think the question is that's being asked at this point in, this is from a clip from a movie. So you can look at the English and then look at the color-coded version in Thai. And you can either write in the chat or turn off your mic and share. What is the question being asked?
Have you eaten yet?
What did you say?
Have you eaten yet?
Perfect. Have you eaten yet? Exactly. So this is from a movie that is spoken in Thai. It's actually a really great movie. It's called How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies. It's emotional, but really great. And there are English subtitles. So one thing that I noticed is the subtitles. I was listening in Thai and I had English subtitles on. The subtitles directly translated to "Have you eaten yet?" And this, looking at the words that I provided, that makes sense. But if we go to the next slide, Maria, just to show. Sorry, just one more. Yeah, so it directly translates to have you eaten yet? But that's not truly the meaning of that question. And the direct translation omits the word rice. So if you go to my next slide, Maria, it's just, yeah, one more, please. Yeah. So the expression in Thai, have you eaten rice yet? Gin kao yang, is actually literally directly translated to, yeah, have you eaten rice? But the question is not asking someone if they've literally had a bowl of rice recently. The question is more so asking someone and to show care about your physical and mental well-being. So if I was watching this movie and I'd never taught in Thailand or learned Thai or learned some Thai, I would have just assumed it was a very simple question, like, oh, have you had food recently? But this carries a lot of significance, and it's a question that people ask socially, to show that they care about someone and checking in on their mental and physical well-being. Can go. Yep. So the meaning, the direct translation, though, it literally is, have you eaten yet or have you eaten rice yet? The meaning and context is, are you doing okay? Checking in. Are you mentally and physically well? And without understanding the cultural context and being able to read between the lines, per se, that line wouldn't have carried as much weight for someone. And the first section of our presentation is going to focus on verbal reasoning, which has to do with inference and metaphor, but also understanding the cultural context. So when we discuss verbal reasoning, a few of the main things that we're going to focus on is, of course, what is verbal reasoning? What are the challenges for multilingual learners related to verbal reasoning? And how can we teach effectively to our MLs?
And I did just want to add on to what you were saying, Christiana, and I do apologize because my screen is here on the left, so you're probably not seeing my face this way. But I would say that when you take a look at the reading rope, it's split into the lower strands and the upper strands. And so when we talk about word recognition, we are looking at the lower strands of the rope. So that includes decoding, phonological awareness. And over time, these strands become increasingly automatic. But when we are talking about the upper strands, we're looking at language comprehension. And that includes the parts that we are going to be speaking about today. That includes verbal reasoning, literacy knowledge. These do not become automatic, but they grow increasingly strategic, right? So it's important to know that while decoding is a finite skill with specific rules, language comprehension is unconstrained, right? So that means it doesn't follow a predictable sequence, and it varies wildly among students based on their vocabulary, their experiences, and that's what makes it more complex to teach. So although the Scarborough's reading rope that you saw illustrates how the reading skills are intertwined, we did just want to make sure we emphasize where in the strands verbal reasoning and literacy knowledge are placed. So when we think about what is verbal reasoning, the definition that we have here is it's the ability to think about a text and move beyond it to its literal meaning, right? And move beyond, making sure that you are using logical inferences, you're integrating ideas, you're interpreting figurative language and metaphors, and it relies heavily on a robust background knowledge. And I think this is what we wanted to kind of introduce with our activity, with Christiana talking about the Thai language, how sometimes not having that context, not having the complete background knowledge kind of gives us a different way to interpret things and how different students uh, may infer or may not be able to infer based on that background knowledge.
Yeah, so just to expand upon this a little bit more, inferring the meaning from what's explicitly and implicitly stated, I think that kind of sums up verbal reasoning in a sentence, because it's not just the literal meaning, which I think can be a big challenge for multilingual learners at times. Another example for local people like New Jersey and South Jersey people and Philly area, I always do a warm-up activity with like the phrase "Go Birds" in my class, and have students discuss what does "Go Birds" mean. And initially, most students will reply, "Oh, something literally they're thinking about a bird." But of course, we know from living in this area, it's a greeting that people might say if they're fans of the Eagles. So, um, talking about the explicit and implicit context is important with verbal reasoning, because it's not just the words in isolation, but the students need to understand the cultural context as well.
Yes, so, and once again, within the framework of Scarborough's rope, verbal reasoning refers to a reader's ability to think about a text and infer meaning from what is both explicitly and implicitly stated. And once again, we tied that into our example that the tie lesson that Christiana shared. So verbal reasoning requires problem-solving skills, abstract reasoning skills, and it involves working memory. And when we're talking about background knowledge, again, it's the foundation for inferencing. It does strengthen cognitive processes, it supports textual analysis, and it also enables advanced comprehension. And so this is AI generated. Love Gemini when you put in descriptions, and we thought this was a great illustration of low knowledge and a strong knowledge base. And when we think about a low knowledge base, this could equal overload. For example, when students don't have much background knowledge, trying to understand a text takes a lot of mental effort. So they have to work hard to connect new information to very limited prior knowledge, which then increases the cognitive load. So this can overwhelm working memory, and it makes it difficult to build an accurate information of an understanding of a story or a text. So as a result, information is less likely to be stored in a long-term memory, and comprehension does break down. Whereas if in a strong knowledge base, this is easier and deeper comprehension. When students already know a lot about a topic, they can easily pull information while reading, and connecting new ideas to what they already know happens quickly and automatically. This reduces the cognitive load and frees up the working memory.
So in general, cognitive load is going to be greater for multilingual learners in comparison to their monolingual peers. I had an article linked here from NIH with the quote says, furthermore, it's believed that bilinguals' dual language processing imposes a heavier cognitive load on their working memory. So there's research that backs this up. Bilingual and multilingual students are going to be their cognitive load is going to be greater than their monolingual peers. So as language teachers, we need to find ways to lower the cognitive load to improve their learning.
So how do we address this? So we, as educators, we need to be intentional. That means we should plan for explicit instruction. This means clear modeling skills, step-by-step, structured lesson plans, language supports, and making expectations transparent. So rather than assuming students will infer or pick up language implicitly, we need to directly teach vocabulary concepts and reasoning strategies in a structured way. So the combination of extending processing time and explicit intentional instruction helps reduce that cognitive overload we're just talking about and supports more equitable access to complex learning tasks. So what does this all mean? If background knowledge is the fuel for the verbal reasoning engine, then how does the teacher drive that information? So one of the things we want to briefly discuss is this Goldilocks principle for text selection. So to help drive background knowledge and verbal reasoning, we should shift away from teaching reading comprehension as a set of isolated strategies and instead explicitly teach what we say a more knowledge-rich curriculum. And I will just give an example. I had two students once from Guatemala, and I was very excited. Like I said, I was an early childhood educator, and I was very excited to teach about fairy tales. And I was going to start a whole series of different fairy tales. And I had found out that the two students that I had did not know any of the fairy tales that I thought were common and knowledge. So they didn't know Red Riding Hood, they didn't know Goldilocks. It was their missing background knowledge, and that gap wasn't about ability. It was just missing background and cultural exposure. So this, once again, means that we should intentionally um, introduce content-rich topics across all subject areas, including science, history, cultural studies, thematic units, to give depth and coherence. When we're thinking about this Goldilocks principle, what we're really saying is we have to match text to the topic being studied. We need to choose texts that are at the right level of difficulty. It's challenging enough to require inferencing using background knowledge, but not so difficult that it would overwhelm the working memory. And we need to have coherent texts that support but not hinder understanding. One of the things I will share is that once you start introducing as a thematic unit fairy tales, I love talking about fairy tales, especially with young students. You can go ahead and also teach fractured fairy tales. They can also be useful tools. So when students first build understanding of a traditional fairy tale, so you could do that through read aloud, storytelling, share text, then they have that and develop this background knowledge that helps them to recognize patterns, characters, and story structures. And once that foundation is in place, fractured fairy tales can be a great way to introduce a more structured and extended thinking. So students can compare various stories and how they've changed, and they can explain how and why authors break away from the original tale. And that's where you can really go ahead and deepen verbal reasoning. And I'll also just build here. So when we think about building background knowledge, we're also thinking about this multimodal way of experiential learning. So building background knowledge shouldn't just rely just on the text alone. Students learn best when they can see, hear, and experience new ideas in multiple ways. And teachers can bring learning to life through hands-on activities that go beyond text to build background knowledge. Use hands-on real-world experiences. You can do this by inviting experts to deepen understanding, incorporate visuals, videos, and artifacts, and provide context before you read unfamiliar topics and introduce unfamiliar topics. One of these great things I actually heard today is a class visiting the library. That's a real life task that gives background knowledge about what you do in a library. And there are some students that haven't had that experience before, or simply visiting your neighborhood bakery and making connections like that. This is a great way to connect, let's say, before you read the story Little Red Hen. So there are different ways to utilize your community to add context to and background knowledge to your class. And also, I used to do virtual field trips. And Christiana, did you want to add what you
Yeah,
experienced there too?
yeah, absolutely. I noticed at the beginning most people selected that they're most likely to do either Likert scale, to do visuals related to the text, as you're pre-teaching. One thing that I found to be effective, especially with secondary, but I think this could really work across all grade levels, is peeking into the text before reading. One thing that I've found to be effective is giving students pictures or picture cards related to some of the things happening in the story. And this is a good way to, again, get them talking and engaged and interested in the conceptual pieces of what you'll be reading.
Okay, so fostering verbal reasoning. And when we think about that, once again, we are thinking about providing regular access to challenging, complex text, excuse me, fostering productive struggle through collaborative work. And we're going to talk a little bit about using the build framework. And what that is, it stands for build knowledge, unpack vocabulary, infer through modeling, link to life experiences, and deepen understanding. And we do this through an approach of a gradual release of responsibility for strategy application. So once again, when we're talking about the build framework, I said that B was building background knowledge intentionally. So we can't expect students to make inferences if they lack the context needed to fill in the gaps. So educators should introduce content, here I go again, content-rich topics across the curriculum. So that means that you can use thematic units that give depth and incorporate a wide variety of rich narratives like fairy tales. But you can also include informational texts. So that could mean, for example, a unit on the ocean, a unit on caves. So students might read about real life, learn science concepts, understand about habitats, and even hear from a marine biologist, right? And the U is unpack necessary vocabulary beforehand. So before reading it, it is essential to identify and pre-teach vocabulary and concepts. So early vocabulary development directly supports a child's ability to inference and make inferences. So when reading text set in unfamiliar places or environments, we need to provide visual supports or short videos that can help build that necessary background knowledge and make unfamiliar references more accessible. The I is for infer, meaning out loud through teacher modeling. So teachers should model inferencing during read alouds using think aloud strategies. So this involves pausing to ask questions such as, what do you think is happening here? Why might this character be acting this way? And this encourages students to kind of justify their inferences and using evidence from text alone with their own background knowledge. And two more here. L, link the text to students' real life experiences. So connecting stories to students' own experiences help make more learning more meaningful. Like asking students, have been to the ocean, have seen a beach, have seen penguins before. Encourage students to relate text to familiar routines, their emotions, or their personal experiences. So for instance, after reading about characters who feel lost, maybe ask students to share a time when they felt the same way. And these connections then help them to bridge the gap between what's in the story, what's in the text, to what they're feeling and what's in the real world. And finally, deepen understanding through extension activities. So reinforce inferencing skills through writing, discussion, and more importantly, creative projects. So one effective strategy is to have students write descriptions that require others to make inferences. So introduce the concepts of show, don't tell, for example. Instead of writing it was a hot day, a student might write, my ice cream melted before I could lick it. Exploring idioms and figurative languages then can further strengthen students' interpretive thinking.
So, in relation to thematic units, there's a unit that I just worked through with my high school ESL class that was based on the concept of the American dream, and then literature and videos based on that concept as well. And what I find interesting teaching newcomers at the secondary level, I often find that there is a gap in terms of the historical um, knowledge about the United States. And that obviously is going to bleed into their understanding of concepts in their American history courses as well. So, one thing that I try to prioritize when I'm introducing a unit that I think would be interconnected with maybe some of the other things they're learning in school is to really just ask a lot of questions about what they know, what they already know, just to see where they're at and where the gaps are. I find that with secondary, sometimes we make assumptions that, oh, well, this student's in ninth grade or 10th grade, or they're in fifth grade. They've definitely heard of this thing before. But if we don't know what units or content is covered in their previous school or their previous country, but especially when it comes to historical context, I've noticed that there typically is a gap. So with this thematic unit with the American Dream, I've had my students doing a lot of discussion, and I've looped in related vocabulary as well. And I find that if you connect literature to maybe different kinds of videos, but different mediums, it can make the students connect more to the text itself. My students read the poem The New Colossus and compared it to I Too by Langston Hughes. So once you give that cultural context and the historical context, it could make the poems and the text that you're reading more meaningful. So I find that frequently asking questions and checking for understanding is really important because if we make assumptions about what our students know, we might not be right, and then we might be missing. There might be a lot of gaps.
So like I said, we were trying to weave in a little bit of the ML connection here. So we're going to connect with did you want me to read this, Christiana? I didn't want to.
Um, yeah, I mean, I could go through some of it if that works. But yeah, newcomers, at every level, I think using the first language is going to be really critical for their ability to participate. And allowing students to recall experiences from their home countries is crucial as well. Um, that is going to create efficiency in learning, and letting them utilize the L language is going to build on their existing background knowledge from their home country. It's also going to make them connect to the new concepts. I think that's also going to help the reducing the cognitive load. So use of the L1, it's going to help them building vocabulary in English and going to free up cognitive space so they can have higher order thinking. Do you want to talk about the multimodal, Maria, knowledge?
Yeah, so once again, when we talk about using all of our senses, when we were referring to multimodal for knowledge building, so that once again could be translation tools, media tools, real world, as we had said, real authentic experiences helps with task building, plus that cultural knowledge piece, and using students' strongest language supports to help them master content while they're learning language. And finally, a little bit here about cross-linguistic awareness. So language knowledge is part of the background knowledge, as we know already. So like Christiana had discussed in her Thai lesson, there are patterns, cognates and patterns support some of that decoding with new languages. So understanding structure um, and syntax sounds strengthens language learning skills. But all of this all takes a place to help reduce that cognitive load. So we wanted just to pause here because I know we've been doing a lot of chatting here, but we want to just give you a moment to look at this painting. It's a Norman Rockwell painting and it's called Coming and Going. So if you could just take a moment to look at the painting and tell us what you think is happening in this painting. And you can just go ahead and put it in the chat. Any ideas that you might have about what is happening, or maybe describe something you see or what you think is going on.
Or what catches your attention and what you notice right away?
And we'll just give everybody a couple minutes to take a look at it.
The child is sticking his head out of the window. Yep. Yeah, that catches your attention.
I like Norman Rockwell paintings, first of all.
Yeah. They seem more lively in the first one and tired in the second one, as if they're returning. Absolutely. In the top one, they're excited, and the bottom, they're tired, coming and going. Definitely. Yeah, it seems that most people, oh, before and after something, absolutely. Most people made the assumption that they were on the way somewhere in the first picture. You can even tell from like the light of the day, the reflection in the car, the expression on the children's faces. The energy level obviously is much higher in that first portion. And then in the bottom, it seems like everyone's tired. It's later in the day, maybe at night, someone's asleep in the front. So those are some inferences that people can make just from knowing this painting, but not understanding the context behind it.
So I'm going to provide a little background knowledge about this painting. So in the economic upswing, this is after World War II, there were record numbers of Americans who decided that they would start experiencing the US. And so a lot of Americans took to, let's say, the open highway and vacationing. So Norman Rockwell's painting Coming and Going captures what is at the time an emerging trend. So this is a two-panel, obviously, depiction of a family on their way on a summer road trip. So in that top panel, which is going, the dad there is confidently driving the car. Maybe some of us can have similar experiences. And the mom is beside him holding the youngest child there. So there's excitement. You see the kids kind of in the back seat. There's an older brother there. He's leaning into the wind. The family dog is energized. The little sister there is blowing bubble gum while teasing passing cars as they go by. So even I think grandma is in there too. She sits upright. She's got a little stoic, and straight ahead. And if anybody's been on vacation with their family, maybe they have had similar experiences to this. The bottom panel is coming. So we see a little bit of the energy from the first panel shift a little bit. So dad looks pretty tired I assume after the long vacation. Mom has fallen asleep, still holding her child on the back seat, and the dog and the bubble blowing sister there are kind of worn out from their vacation. Grandma is the same, just remains as composed and unreadable as before. But what we do see here is this Norman Rockwell painting has subtle clues here built in, um, and connecting to a historical context at a time. So we kind of have a richer knowledge of this post-World War II America, and we see how art can even teach us to think inferentially. So reading between the lines, so to speak, in this case, is reading between the panels, right? And I think this painting is an example of how we can, utilize our background knowledge and understand about the 1940s in America and what family life was like, and to fully understand the story in its social context. And I do like using visuals and paintings to kind of get students thinking. So once again, to understand the contextual meaning, Rockwell's paintings need you to understand a little bit of background knowledge, and then students can figure out what's happening by making inferences. Did you want to jump in here, Christiana?
Yep. Yep. So there are two main types of inferences related to verbal reasoning. So we have local, which are connected to the text. So it's, whatever the text is saying, it's directly from that text. The pronoun references, Molly went to the park, then she went home. So we know based on the text, we're talking about Molly. It could also be cause and effect. With the Norman Rockwell painting, we could make assumptions about the first panel versus the second panel, right? You could tell that the family was excited to go somewhere. It was earlier in the day, just from looking at the photo looking at the painting based on the lighting and based on the facial expressions. Whereas global inferences, that's really reading in between the lines, going beyond the text, using background knowledge to interpret meaning. The example of Have You Eaten Rice Yet from the Thai movie, the Goldilocks example, using the two different kinds of fairy tales, and the history behind the American dream. All of these concepts or units would need the global and gap filling kind of inferences.
And so we always try to connect with something we've done in the classroom before. I have when I've worked previously with first and second graders on inferencing, first of all, it is not a one and done experience. Inferencing, as we said earlier, is a challenging skill. And one of the things that we have mentioned is to be very explicit. And so I had students use inferencing cards to develop a way to communicate how they infer by saying, I think, or maybe, I infer, my guess, perhaps I predict, as ways to be able to communicate through language when they are inferring. And then I also used to have little puzzle pieces as exercises to spend in terms of a quick visual for how we can use visuals again to support, just like the painting we showed you. I always use visuals to have students begin to use clues and what they know, which equals their inferencing power. So in this picture, you can ask questions like, what do you think is happening here? What time of year do you think it is? And how do you know that? What is happening to her? And what, more importantly, is um, what do you think is going to happen next? And how do you know? And how does she feel? And so all of these are important questions, but more importantly, I think it's also a way to be explicit about how we engage students in the skill of inferencing. Do you,
Yeah, and just to tie back in the one of the first examples with the Likert scale. So it's kind of similar to Maria's activity with the cards. Um, when I've had students do the Likert scale, I always provide them with sentence frames or sentence starters, just because, again, we want to lower the cognitive load. So if we're giving students a starting point, and we're giving them some support with the language piece, then they can focus more on expressing their ideas. And that's where a lot of that learning and understanding is going to happen. And so our third section is going to be on literacy knowledge. So this is another aspect of language comprehension in Scarborough's reading rope. We're going to focus on what literacy knowledge is, what are the challenges for multilingual learners, and then how can we teach it effectively to our multilingual learners.
So this is another visual. Maybe some of you recognize it, but it is a map of Space Mountain. So if you are standing at Space Mountain and need to find the closest restroom, what specific symbols or features on this map do we need to use to figure that out? And I will first tell you this is something I study very frequently when I go with my kids. So, um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah,
Maybe people can put it in the chat, or you can turn off your microphone and just say, like, what would you look for on the map if you wanted to find the nearest bathroom?
The picture where there's a man and then a woman.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we shared this map.
Toilet.
So yes, that's true. I see in the chat. So we do look at this map here. We look at the layout. We look at the pathways. Maps are great because they're organized visually. And you can think of it almost like visuals in a text, right? You can follow paths and arrows, just like here from Space Mountain to the restroom. And in the same way as you follow sentences from left to right, from top to bottom in a book. So using a map like this of Space Mountain shows literacy knowledge because it requires understanding the purpose of the text. In this case, finding where the restroom is, right? Recognizing features and conventions like this map, symbols, legends, and labels, and more importantly, applying reading strategies. How do we follow the paths? How do we interpret scale, right? These are all examples of ways that we connect literacy knowledge to using a map as a visual guide. And once again, just we want to extend this connection to the reading rope and understanding that literacy knowledge here is a student's foundational knowledge of how text functions and organized. So this understanding begins before formal schooling, right? As young children develop basic print concepts, they need to know how to hold a book and that English is read from left to right, as I said earlier, and from top to bottom. And as students progress, their literacy knowledge then becomes more sophisticated. So they learn to navigate complex text structures that include not just reading from left to right, but understanding cause and effect patterns or narrative arcs, right, in a story. And they can use texts like the table of context, glossaries, subheadings, graphic illustrations, and subheadings. Excuse me. So, what is literacy knowledge? It's defined as understanding the purpose, the features, and the conventions of text. And it's an understanding of print awareness, knowing books have an author. You can read from left and right. And visually, and how do you visually recognize text? There is a structure and features that are common, navigating paragraphs, understanding narrative versus informational text. What are glossaries? What are headings? And what are indexes? And really applying literacy knowledge in the classroom means going beyond simply reading materials. It really requires, once again, the teacher to be intentional in their purposes and understanding explicit instruction in practice. And so when we talk about print awareness, we once again talk about directionality and explicitly explaining that to students. Um, Understanding how content is organized from simple to full paragraphs to narrative arcs to informational layouts, and then more specifically navigating specific elements of text. And oh, go ahead, Christiana, sorry.
Yeah, so some instructional moves that we can implement to build literacy knowledge. One, read a wide array of fiction and nonfiction genres. I think it can be fun to incorporate different kinds of texts, like Maria said before, with the stories with the folk tales or the fairy tales. I know that some people always like to do a unit on that, and I think that students might really enjoy that, especially those who enjoy more fiction. So making sure you're balancing fiction and nonfiction in the text that you choose. Again, with the providing explicit instruction about the text structures, you could do this by having students do a scavenger hunt to find who's the author of this book, find what happens on this page. You could give them a list of instructions, but just ensuring that they're able to locate the glossary, they're able to locate the table of contents, they're able to find the title and the author. Those are important skills related to the literacy knowledge. Also, using graphic organizers and signal words can help students with this. Reading text for authentic purposes. So, doing a unit where you might be reading a recipe for cooking, incorporating things that can be connected to their real lives is going to make students more interested in the material and it's going to make it more meaningful. And also integrating reading and writing so students can craft texts in the same genres that they study. And I know we mentioned before about connecting it to their lives. I think finding texts that students can feel connected to is really critical in making them excited about reading. Recently, I had students read a story about a woman who immigrated from Cuba, and she talks about all the things she misses in Cuba. I miss the mango trees. In Georgia, in the U.S., we only have magnolia trees. They're not as beautiful. And she describes the differences. And I had students read that text and then write based on using that as a mentor text. So I think that's a good way to incorporate reading and writing. You can use those short texts as mentor texts for your students as well.
And once again, this just is another AI generated image, but we like the way it explicitly highlights the moves that Christiana discussed. And you heard us say throughout our time that we need to think about literacy knowledge in terms of making sure that we are explicit in our instruction, and that is by the use of using graphic organizers and the signal words that you just mentioned, using authentic reading context, and then once again, integrating writing. So reading and writing are skills that are interwoven. So how do we students become strategic readers? So as a reading specialist, this was very important in my work with students. Teaching how texts work is another way to be very explicit and working with students. And we do that by exposing students to diverse texts and the structures. And that's why it's really important, as Christiana just said, to use authentic reading for a variety of purposes, but making sure that they engage in hands-on text exploration. And so this could be done through immersing students in diverse genres like novels, poetry, informational books, even speeches and news articles. And this broad exposure helps students understand how different genres work and their purposes. And then also, teachers should not assume students understand how texts are organized. So instead, they should be explicitly taught structures. Even the map that we just showed, how does it work, right? Reading for authentic purposes, students learn more effectively when reading serves a purpose. And making sure that when we say hands-on exploration, we're talking about trying to have a scavenger hunt. Where can we find indexes? Where do we see captions? Where do we see glossaries? And making it fun and making it engaging. And maybe even comparing different writing systems could be something that would strengthen your print awareness as well. So applying literacy knowledge helps students move from being passive in their reading to actively understanding how text is constructed.
So, we also wanted to highlight, in terms of literacy development, a couple of things that could be challenges in support, or how we can support multilingual learners through challenges in developing their literacy. So we wanted to talk about decoding versus the comprehension gap. Just because a student can sound out a word doesn't mean that they can understand what's going on. I think one way to support students through this is, again, like checking in frequently for understanding. Recently, I had students reading a short text with relatively easily decodable words, and it seemed on the surface level that they understood, so it was happening. But then I paused and asked a couple comprehension questions in the middle of that page, and it was clear that at least a few students didn't know what the true meaning of that was. So making sure we're closing the decoding versus comprehension gap, and we can do that through engaging students and checking for comprehension, asking them if they understand what's going on or to explain it. Another thing is the L2 with the language acquisition factors. So taking that into consideration when we're building our lessons. Building cultural knowledge. So the example of have you eaten rice yet? Or go birds, right? Out of context, those things might mean something different, and students are not going to automatically understand that cultural context. So we need to be explicit in building that. Using the home language as an asset. And obviously, if you're on this call today, I'm sure that that is not something that you're not doing. That's something that you are doing. We, as language teachers, we do think of the home language as an asset. So this is probably something that's more reinforcing what you already do. And dedicated language development, English language development, of course.
And I just will just piggyback on what you were saying, just in terms of when we're talking about learning a new language, So when we're talking about learning a new language, L2 and the reading rope, we need to consider it isn't just about reading and writing, but it involves many factors working together, right? Just as a reminder, environment, exposure to language, their social interaction, how they talk and communicate with others, their emotion, their confidence, their motivation, their comfort, their biology and background, their age, their brain development, their cultural development, and of course their thinking skills. So their ability to pay attention, to be able to see if they can reflect, and their whether or not they are independent learners at that point. And as we kind of round out the end of our presentation, once again, we just wanted to talk about explicitly instruction for me. And when I worked in push-in models and in pull-out groups, I often did a before, during, after to help me structure the way I engaged with students and literacy knowledge and verbal reasoning. One of the things that I used to do is intentionally focused on what book I was going to read. I would always make sure that with the students, we would read this book several times so that it wasn't just this one and done way. I would sit and think about what exactly were my focus skills, and obviously plan vocabulary. And I would make sure that I was intentional in thinking about that structure before, during, and after. That background section here is important. So when we think about the before part of reading, to make sure that the goal is to build curiosity before you read. So building an initial schema for students to get them excited to read is important. And this directly supports multilingual learners by reducing unnecessary language overload here. So while still building that foundational knowledge, they need to be able to access the text. This is also important when you're thinking about vocabulary and genre and how they are explicitly taught. They are key entry points into comprehension for multilingual learners in particular. So how is a text structured, the genre, and understanding the academic vocabulary here is crucial. When I read a story, I would do post-its in the books as I was reading them, and I would put my think aloud strategy there. I would, especially for me to remember, and with students. So putting post-its there and asking questions that students can infer also what is going on as well. So once again, the before reading part is the introduction. It sets a purpose. You build vocabulary, you introduce genre, you build background knowledge. And it's also important to think about your students. What makes them unique and what are their abilities and what are their interests when you put all of this together to be able to figure out how you're going to engage your students. And obviously, the think aloud strategy happens during reading. As I said with my post-it notes, there's always an opportunity to have students stop and pause and turn and talk and ask what the character is thinking about to build scaffolding. And obviously give time to talk, use visual aids, use those pictures that we shared throughout our time here today. And most importantly, pause, ask questions, pause, pause, and review, right? And finally, after reading, I'd like to create established routines in my structure when I'm working with students. So once you have established that before, during, after reading pattern, students engage in discussion, respectfully agree or disagree. I know you could say, like I told you before, I was an early childhood educator, but circle time isn't just for preschoolers. They can be for older students too. It's a great time to teach good listening skills. And also to learn how to self-evaluate, and also to provide opportunities to have written responses, or even I call them artistic responses. So not just writing, but drawing as well. And so we come to the end of our presentation this evening. And we hope that tonight you might have seen something that you've done before. Um, but what we want you to do in terms of our exit tickets this evening is what have you done before? So put something in the chat of an example of an activity that you've done that's similar to something that we've shared that made you think, oh, I've done this. And that you can reference today. For example, there are several things we discuss in terms of strategy, the build model, using guest speakers and hands-on manipulatives, field trips. Maybe you did fairy tales before. Maybe you've done something with recipes. So just take a moment in the chat to tell us what you've already done.
Using sticky notes, asking questions during reading, absolutely thinking out loud. The virtual field trips. And then, predicting what will happen next. Oh, that's great. Predicting what will happen next through drawing or writing. Yeah, I like that you included drawing too, because that makes it more accessible for different learners. Comparing and contrasting two stories. Yeah, with Goldilocks and the Fractured Fairy Tales. At the high school level, we've worked on visual analysis of primary sources, listening to music, awesome. From the Harlem Renaissance, listening to audio of speeches. Yeah, that's great. Use of visuals, picture prompts, for verbal reasoning. I use the virtual field trips for building background knowledge. Awesome. Prediction, comparing and contrasting stories. Yeah, that's awesome. And these are all great skills across any grade level, but the compare and contrast, especially because they typically have to do that on the writing section too for access. Responding with drawings to prompts, maybe for newcomers or earlier elementary. Yeah.
And I just love this because I think sometimes as educators, we're always told to add things. And now we see sometimes that we've already do a lot of these and it validates that we've have best practices in our classroom, but it also maybe tonight was about connecting what we already do to what we know about best practices in verbal reasoning and in literacy knowledge. So our final question for you tonight is, maybe there's one new thing that you heard about this evening, or one new thing that someone shared. What would that be? And if you could add that one new thing, would you focus on verbal reasoning or literacy knowledge? And how would this be successful for your students in your classroom? And you can add that in the chat there.
And it can even be as a do now, maybe I would show a photo that is related to the chapter of the book we're going to read or the short story we'll read later in the week. Could be anything that you are hoping to do in the future to improve the verbal reasoning or literacy knowledge of your students.
Give everybody a minute.
The mystery bag, yeah, that's super. That's very fun.
And the mystery bag could be extended to other
Sticky,
lessons as well.
absolutely. Sticky notes to ask questions during reading, absolutely. Yep. Yes, and it's a reminder for yourself as you're going through. I like the way you approach doing reading multiple times and how to structure that process with post-its. I find at high school they don't always want to read multiple times, but if you explain reasoning, it might help. Absolutely. And if you're recycling the material for secondary, again, if you did something using that like as a mentor text or having them analyze certain parts, that might be an effective way to recycle a text too. Like, what do you think the character is feeling at this point? I like the idea of inference cards to promote more interest or inferencing discussion. Inference cards, yeah, inference cards are a hit. Yeah, I think giving sentence stems that, uses some of that language is important because if the students have the ideas, they just need the words to express it, that will help move the discussion along.
That's awesome. So thank you everyone for coming tonight and listening to our presentation. I hope that you do take that one thing back to your classroom, that one new thing. And the PowerPoint, I believe, was in the chat. There was a link to it. But if you ever have any questions, our email is in that PowerPoint slide. And I think that we said that it was also going to be available on the NJTESOL-NJBE platform as well.
Mhm.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.
And there's the survey for the PD certificate as well. Thank you for
I'm
coming.
just going to stop recording and then.